Single mom accidentally sends touching voice note to CEO. His incredible reply reveals hidden compassion. Laura's fingers trembled as she held her phone, the weight of the world resting on her shoulders. The early morning chaos in their cramped Chicago apartment was unyielding. The kids, still in pajamas, tugged at her pant legs while attempting to finish their breakfasts. Lurking behind her fierce demeanor, the anxiety of being a single mother clawed at her thoughts. How could she keep them warm, fed, and happy while battling back-to-back shifts at the diner and freelance gigs she barely scraped by with? As she attempted to relay her voice note to her best friend in the midst of the fray, instead, it went straight to Dave, a tech startup CEO. "I just feel like I'm failing sometimes," she had unwittingly exposed, revealing her fears and relentless struggles. Before realizing her mistake, panic surged through her, but it was too late. Her heart raced, and she could hear the kids now arguing over the last slice of toast. Should she send a quick apology? What would he think of her? The message had been meant for someone who understood, yet here was a stranger sitting in some high-rise office, possibly laughing or rolling his eyes at her vulnerabilities. The thought of someone like Dave, whose life seemed polished and effortless, dissecting her raw feelings filled her with unease. Her day unfolded in a blur of sweaty brows and the smell of fried food, punctuated by racing thoughts. How could a reminder of her failures, her financial insecurity, slip into the hands of someone like him? Surely, he would have little to offer in the way of compassionate advice. Unbeknownst to her, Dave's eyes softened as he listened to her voice, raw, genuine, resonating with a reality so many ignored. He felt that pang of awareness, recognizing the disparity between their worlds. After a few moments that felt like an eternity, he pressed reply. "I found your message incredibly touching, Laura," he typed. "I'd love to mentor you." His offer, framed in his corporate jargon, was like a lifeline tossed into her sea of despair. Doubt mustered its strength, whispering she wasn't worthy of his time or effort. "Am I seriously considering this?" she thought as the turmoil of self-doubt threatened to pull her under. "Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Laura found herself grappling with newfound responsibilities. As she tentatively embarked on this mentorship with Dave, her heart swelled with a forgotten passion for coding, yet, the pressure mounted. Every moment spent learning felt like a betrayal to her children's needs. One more second that she wasn't in their world, nurturing, guiding, supporting. Torn, she tossed and turned each night, balancing dreams against realities, heart against ambition. Could she actually climb this ladder while keeping her family grounded? Then came the company contest, her chance to shine. She envisioned an app that mirrored her struggles, a digital helping hand for fellow mothers, but each keystroke was laced with self-doubt. Judgment loomed in the chatter of the crowd, and Laura was all too aware of the eyes that might see her failure, echoing her internal fears. Desperation clawed at her, a tempest of emotions swirling as she prepared. As she stood before the crowd, her voice quaking, she faced the stark choice: remain in the shadows of a silent sacrifice or step into the light of her dreams, knowing that either could shatter her carefully built world. With every fiber of her being, she feared disappointment. Would her ambition drive her family apart? As silence settled over the room, the tension mounted, each second stretching into an eternity. Laura steeled herself. The crossroads of her life lay ahead. Would she dare to invoke her power or retreat into the familiar darkness? The moment teetered on the edge of a profound revelation, once again leaving her questioning everything she had thought she knew. Laura stood at the threshold of uncertainty, her heart pounding as the crowd's expectant gazes bore down on her. The time had arrived for her to articulate her vision, to voice the struggles that had turned into motivations, yet the weight of those very struggles knotted in her throat. The initial flutters of excitement had become an avalanche of doubt, swallowing the conviction she had built during sleepless nights and frantic coding sessions. "Focus, Laura," she whispered to herself in a desperate bid to drown out the spiraling thoughts. Back home, her kids depended on her. Their laughter and innocent dreams floated in her mind, urging her to channel that same spark into her presentation. Yet each image of their faces held the sharp edge of responsibility, gnawing at her resolve. What if she failed? What if the risk she took fractured their little world? The murmurs of the audience faded into a dull hum as Laura recalled what she wanted to create: an app designed to support single mothers like her, an answer to a question she never had the confidence to ask. She envisioned a network of resources, a community where mothers could share their difficulties while helping one another shine amidst chaos. Dave had seen her potential, perhaps it was time to see it in herself. She took a deep breath, drawing on the energy bubbling beneath her skin, and finally stepped forward. "Hello everyone," she started, her voice steadying as she locked eyes with a few friendly faces in the crowd. "I'm Laura, a single mom, and I understand how challenging it can be to balance dreams with reality." Her words flowed more freely now, the narrative wrapping around her audience like a warm embrace. Each story she wove pulled her in further, grounding her in shared experience. The tentativeness that had once scampered through her veins began to melt away, replaced by a flicker of courage. For the first time, she could see the cracks in her insecurities, illuminated by the glow of her ambition. But just as she began to gain traction, a flicker of apprehension surged. Was her idea really viable? Did she have the skills? The technical expertise? Would the crowd recognize her struggle and validate her vision? In a moment of raw honesty, she admitted, "I have felt lost and overwhelmed, but I also have felt the embrace of community, the strength found in sharing burdens." The connection birthed in the vulnerability surprised her. It wrapped her in warmth, shifting her focus away from self-doubt and instead towards empathy. As she concluded with a heartfelt call for collaboration and understanding, the thunderous applause took her breath away. In that moment, Laura recognized the power of her voice amidst her fears. She had stepped into the light, and what she saw was the reflection of not just a determined mother but also an emerging entrepreneur ready to take ownership of her life. After her presentation, amid congratulatory remarks and fervent conversations, she found Dave waiting, an approving smile on his face. "That was incredible, Laura," he said, the sincerity in his voice striking her. "You've got a rare gift, and I'm excited to help you refine it." As they exchanged ideas, her heart swelled with pride. Despite the anxiety still echoing in her mind, Laura felt herself rising. She had taken the leap, and now, for the first time, she could finally see the horizon stretching before her, dotted with opportunities. But with every taste of success, the shadows of doubt lingered. What sacrifices would she still have to make? As new challenges loomed on the horizon, Laura questioned whether she could find the balance between the growing demands of her aspirations and the needs of her family. The path to her dreams was ahead, but the journey was just beginning, and she was left wondering, would she have the strength to navigate both worlds without losing herself? The next morning, Laura's mind raced through the events of the previous day as she prepared breakfast for her children. The din of cereal bowls clinking and the sound of her kids squabbling over who would get the last banana pierced through her thoughts. The warmth of their laughter, which used to seem like a backdrop to her uncertainty, now served as a reminder of her dual responsibilities. In the midst of their morning chaos, she felt the weight of expectation not just from her children but also from herself. She glanced briefly at her phone, which had buzzed with congratulatory messages, but part of her hesitated to indulge in them. Would reading those words of affirmation wrap her in a comfort she didn't yet trust? Or would they confront her with the reality of what lies ahead and the fear of not meeting those expectations? Shaking off the distractions, she made a plan. Today would not just be about enjoying the afterglow of her presentation. This was about actionable steps toward building her vision into reality. After dropping the kids off at school, she headed straight to the coffee shop where she and Dave had agreed to meet. Upon entering, the familiar scent of brewing coffee enveloped her, momentarily lifting her mood. She spotted Dave seated at a back table, his laptop open in front of him. They began reviewing her initial concepts for the app, but with each idea Dave challenged her to unpack what she truly wanted the community to accomplish. "What does success look like for you, Laura?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "Picture the end user. What do they feel when they use your app?" The question sent her mind spiraling. Success had felt abstract until now. She had to translate her emotions into tangible goals. "I want them to feel validated, understood. I want them to know they're not alone in their struggles." As she spoke, the vision sharpened. Hit by a revelation, she committed to creating a user-friendly interface that emphasized connection, a safe space for mothers navigating difficult realities. Her previous fears started to dissipate, but so did another realization: developing this app would require expert guidance she currently lacked. She could feel the looming question of funding hanging over her. Despite her growing determination, the specter of financial uncertainty clouded her vision. What if she poured hours of energy into this initiative only to see it collapse under the weight of a lack of resources? After their meeting, she returned home with a heavier mind. That evening, with her kids nestled into bed, she found herself gazing out of the window, pondering her path. Each small victory from the day clashed with the daunting thought of pursuing investors who might not understand her narrative. Laura took a deep breath, pulling her laptop onto her lap. Feeling madness dance at the edge of her sanity, she began drafting a list of potential contacts, entrepreneurs and investors who had a clear vision of social impact. Each name felt like a leap into the unknown for her. What if she reached out only to be met with silence, or worse, rejection? Just as she hit send on an email to a local angel investor known for supporting women-led startups, a sudden ping from her phone startled her. It was a voice message from Dave, sent at an hour that felt frighteningly late. "Laura, I just thought of something," he began, his voice steady yet excited. "I think we should get your story out there even more. It might just attract the right kind of attention and funding. How do you feel about sharing a part of your journey through a podcast? We could highlight the real struggles of single motherhood while promoting the app." An unexpected thrill coursed through her, igniting a spark she hadn't realized was dimming. The idea felt terrifying and exhilarating, the perfect mix of creative expression and professional ambition. Would she have the courage to expose herself further? The idea of vulnerability became a burning question. The glow from the laptop reflected in her eyes as she contemplated the daunting task ahead. Her heart raced. As she envisioned herself sharing her story, but that also meant confronting everything she feared most: failure, judgment, the oversharing of personal struggles. The tension hung thick in the air as she considered her next steps. Would this new venture bring her closer to fulfilling her dreams, or would it unravel her newfound confidence? As she sat in the silence of her thoughts, she wondered, was she ready to face the world again, not just as a mother but as a voice for many? The moment of decision approached, and the weight of it pressed against her chest with unbearable intensity. The next day dawned with a heavier sense of purpose hanging over Laura. Sleep had eluded her, a restless night had left her feeling both anxious and invigorated. The idea of a podcast loomed large in her thoughts, each potential episode becoming a staircase to ascend toward an unknown summit. Would every story she told feel like an unveiling, exposing her insecurities yet revealing her strength? As she prepared breakfast, she could hear her children chirping with a sense of youthful oblivion. They were unaware of the inner turmoil consuming her. She poured their cereal thoughtfully, trying to immerse herself in their innocence, yet the clatter of bowls felt like a reminder of the noise swirling in her own mind. The laughter echoed, mingling with reminders of her own fractured past, a constant battle between self-doubt and determination. Laura dropped the kids off at school, momentarily buoyed by the bright morning sky. Her gut twisted with unease as she headed to her first meeting with a local podcast producer, the connection that Dave had brokered. Would this be the validation she sought, or another step toward a door that could slam shut on her ambitions? As she approached the studio, she felt unsteady, nerves coiling tightly within her. The polished entrance seemed to reflect a future she yearned for but feared. But as she crossed the threshold, she was greeted by a friendly face, Alyssa, the producer. Her warm smile immediately put Laura at ease, making her realize that vulnerability need not be intimidating. The initial conversation flowed naturally, but as soon as the formalities ended, Alyssa leaned closer. "What drives you, Laura? I want to hear the raw truth." The question ignited something within Laura. It wasn't merely about creating an app, it was about shifting narratives. "I want to tell stories that matter," she found herself saying. "I want mothers to feel visible, to know they're part of a broader experience. We're often taught to carry the burdens alone, but we need connection, we need honesty." Alyssa nodded, her focus intense. "That's a powerful angle, Laura. But you'll have to dig deep. What are the stories you're afraid to tell?" The weight of that question hung between them like a fragile truce, demanding introspection. Laura took a breath, feeling the tension build within her. The reference to fear struck hard. She knew that exposing her own vulnerabilities and struggles could risk ridicule. Yet, something inside her whispered that it couldn't be worse than remaining silent. As they delved into her past, Laura began to share bits she'd kept guarded: her divorce, the sense of isolation, the daily struggle to balance her ambitions with motherhood. With each word, she felt lighter, as if peeling away layers that had previously obscured her true self. "Let's create a plan for your first episode," Alyssa suggested, pulling Laura back from her thoughts. "What do you want the world to know first?" And in that moment, she envisioned the essence of her podcast, not just a platform for her messages, but a vessel for other mothers to feel represented. The journey of a mother shouldn't be a single story. It comprises struggles, triumphs, moments of grace. "I want to invite guests to share their experiences alongside mine," she replied, her mind racing with possibilities. As they mapped the structure for future episodes, Laura felt the prickling fear of self-exposure clash with a tide of excitement. What if her podcast resonated with others? What if it expanded into something greater than she'd ever imagined: a community, connection, healing? When she left the studio, the sky seemed bluer, and her heart beat with greater confidence. But as she registered the shift within her, another daunting realization began to creep in. What if her authenticity didn't resonate? What if the stories she shared were met with indifference or disdain? Her pulse quickened at the thought of putting herself out there, facing judgment from peers, strangers, or worse, her own self-doubt. Could she really navigate this tumultuous sea, not just for herself but for that shared, collective voice among mothers? The complexities of entrepreneurship twisted in a knot deep in her stomach. Yet she felt a spark, the thrill of visibility blazing against the backdrop of her fears. The next chapter in her life awaited her, filled with the promise of profound revelation. As she sat at her kitchen table later that night, laptop open to draft her first episode, one question echoed louder than all the others. Would she have the courage to embrace this opportunity, or would indecision hold her captive? The stakes were high, and the moment loomed larger than she'd anticipated. She was faced with a choice that could change everything. Could she handle the weight of her truth, and how would sharing it reshape her future? The air was thick with anticipation as Laura sat at her kitchen table, fingers poised over the keyboard yet paralyzed by uncertainty. The glow of the laptop screen projected a stark contrast to the fading daylight outside. She could hear the soft laughter of her children playing in the other room, an idyllic scene that heightened her internal struggle. How could she possibly articulate her vulnerabilities to the world when she could barely share them with herself? Her mind raced, flipping through the stories of her life, each moment a thread in the intricate tapestry of motherhood. The divorce needles punctured her thoughts, reminding her of the isolation and judgment. But then came the flashes of pure joy, those fleeting moments when everything felt right. It was this juxtaposition that she needed to articulate, she realized, reminding herself that her experiences were not isolated failures, they were fundamental facets of who she was. What emerged was a plan, not just what stories to tell, but how to tell them. Laura needed to craft a narrative that wouldn't merely voice her truth but would invite others into the conversation. What if she could transform her past into a beacon for others? She started typing, buoyed by the idea that each episode could serve as an invitation into a shared space of understanding. But then came the self-doubt, roaring louder than before. Was she naive to think her journey could resonate? Laura wrestled with this feeling, reflecting on her connection with Alyssa. There had been a glimmer of belief in her dream. If Alyssa saw potential in her, could others? The mental tug-of-war left her breathless. It wasn't just fear of exposure that gripped her, it was the fear of failure, of sinking into obscurity. Just as she began to find her voice, her phone chimed a text from Dave, her best friend and a steadfast supporter. "How's the first episode coming along? Remember, you're not alone in this." It struck her as an anchor in a storm. Those words peeled back the layers of her doubt, breathing encouragement into her thoughts. Perhaps this journey wasn't only about her. If she could connect even a handful of mothers, it would transform the purpose of her discomfort into a shared experience. Pressing onward, she crafted the opening lines of her podcast. They were raw, a bracing disclosure of her diagnosis as a single mother navigating uncharted waters. "I'm Laura, and like many of you, my life has been filled with beauty and chaos," she wrote, words flowing with a palpable urgency. "Today, I invite you to embark on this journey with me, to share our fears, our laughter, and most importantly, our stories." Fueled by inspiration, Laura paused, glancing toward the children, unaware of the emotional maze their mother was traversing. They represented both her motivation and her conflict. Could she talk about the struggle without burdening them? Where was the line between honesty and protection? What if they stumbled across her words someday? Would they feel empowered or embarrassed? She envisioned them listening to the podcasts in the future, their young hearts shaping the very fabric of their beliefs about women, motherhood, and identity. That thought propelled her forward. If her truth could empower them, it was worth the risk. But insecurity gnawed at her heels, leaving her to question whether she was adequately equipped to lead this dialogue. She remembered Alyssa's probing questions, the way her insights had opened a door to deeper conversation about femininity, fragility, and ferocity. The realization struck her, she needed other voices too. As the evening settled into night, Laura captured her initiative with newfound clarity. She needed to reach out to establish a network of mothers willing to share their stories alongside hers. But that meant confronting her fear of rejection head-on. What if they said no? Or worse, what if they didn't respond at all? Laura stared at the blinking cursor on the screen and took a deep breath. The very act of reaching out would mark the difference between stagnation and growth. It was no longer only about her, it was about the somber allure of inviting souls into her shared adventure. With heart pounding, she composed a message to several friends and acquaintances, appealing for guests on her podcast, women she admired yet had never confronted as equals, as partners in storytelling. As she hit send, an unfamiliar thrill coursed through her. Her heart raced, teetering between hope and anxiety. Each tick of time felt monumental, the echo of urgency reverberating in her ears. But doubt still danced in the shadows, whispering uncertainties about whether anyone would respond. Would her boldness lead to connection, or would her vulnerabilities remain unearthed, cloaked in isolation? The moment of truth pressed on her, just as a wave draws closer to the shore, inevitable and powerful. As the minutes dragged on in silence, she felt an unsettling stir within. Was this the descent into her unknown or a leap towards something transformative? What awaited with those first responses would shape not only the podcast but the evolution of her identity. A new chapter beckoned, and Laura knew she was on the precipice of discovery, facing both the promise and peril of what was to come. Would she discover the courage to not just share her story, but become a champion for all mothers longing to speak their truth? Minutes unfolded into what felt like an eternity. Laura fidgeted with her phone, glancing back at the screen every few moments, longing for a response. The laughter of her children faded into a distant hum, replaced by the rapid tempo of her heart. With each passing second, the weight of her choice pressed more heavily on her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed a threshold, one that would either lead her toward liberation or further entrench her in insecurity. The battle between hope and anxiety churned within her. Was this moment a catalyst for transformation, or merely a prelude to disappointment? She recalled the countless times she'd held back business pitches, social interactions, even friendships fearing disapproval or rejection. This time, however, she felt different. There was a flicker of determination igniting a fire within, urging her not to retreat into the shadows. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A notification flashed a response. She inhaled sharply, caught between eagerness and dread. With trembling fingers, she opened the message that momentarily suspended her breath. It was from Jillian, a mother she admired from a distance but never had the courage to approach. "I'd love to talk on your podcast. I have a story that might resonate. Let's chat." A slow smile spread across Laura's face. Elation coursed through her veins, momentarily washing away the doubts. One response. It felt like a seed of validation. If Jillian was willing, perhaps others would follow. The thought sparked a wave of ambition. With that singular confirmation, she began visualizing her podcast not just as a vessel for her voice, but a community for shared resilience. Encouraged, she plunged deeper into her planning. Each segment she sketched out, each topic outlined, became more vibrant with the realization that she wasn't alone. She pictured Jillian's face as she narrated her struggles and triumphs, the tone of empathy guiding them through the labyrinth of motherhood. Determined to build momentum, Laura sent follow-up messages to the others she'd reached out to. She felt the vulnerability morph into strength. The very act of dismantling her fears was forging a new identity. It was as if a long-buried part of her had awakened, eager to connect, understand, and uplift. Days passed, and as the responses trickled in, some were tentative, others enthusiastic, a sense of community began to form. With each incoming message, Laura found herself transforming from the solitary figure hunched over her laptop into a connector of stories. The idea bloomed. She envisioned panels, discussions, an interconnected web of experiences that could create not just a podcast, but a movement of authenticity. However, the undercurrent of fear remained palpable. With each new invitation sent to potential guests, she wrestled with the impending possibility of rejection. What if these women changed their minds? What if the intimate dialogue she craved was met with disinterest? She often replayed Jillian's message, willing it to anchor her uncertainties. One evening, overwhelmed, Laura slipped into the interstices of doubt. She sat on the edge of her bed, ruminating over her earlier enthusiasm. The flickering light from her bedside lamp cast lingering shadows, mirroring her fears. Was she grasping at something out of reach? The voices began to converge, whispering tales of inadequacy, of moments when her aspirations had crumbled under scrutiny. But just then, the laughter of her children resonated through the hallway, cutting through the suffocating quiet. Their carefree mirth rekindled a sense of purpose. They were her inspiration, her reason for diving into this realm despite the storm brewing in her mind. She realized that her journey wasn't merely a personal quest, it was one that could empower her children. The following day, with newfound resolve, she composed a heartfelt message to Jillian. It was a mix of gratitude and vulnerability, an invitation to share not just stories but to elevate each other through their combined narratives. As she typed, Laura felt the walls of doubt wane, replaced by determination, a desire to create spaces where women could feel safe, valued, and celebrated. But as she hit send, there was a shift in the atmosphere, a ripple of challenges she hadn't anticipated. Jillian replied almost instantly, her excitement tempered by the suggestion of including a third party to join their initial conversation. "What if my friend Lisa joins us? She has an inspiring story as well, but it's complicated." Laura felt a wave of apprehension wash over her. Complicated? The complexities of motherhood were one thing, but adding more voices, more layers of emotional intensity. It brought to light an unnerving idea. Would she be able to handle a multitude of narratives? Would she emerge as a leader, or would her anxiety bubble up again, rendering her ineffective? The moment hung in the air, thick with uncertainty. That simple suggestion tugged at her, illuminating a crossroads where her ability to manage the forthcoming dynamics would be tested. She exhaled, realizing that the ultimate growth lay in confronting the trepidation of collaboration within her vision, pushing her limits beyond the confines of her insecurities. As she pondered her response to Jillian, the reality set in this journey was no longer just about sharing her story. It was a platform for amplification, a chance to embody vulnerability while shepherding a collective narrative forward. Yet with that realization came a chilling thought: would she falter or flourish under the scrutiny of added complexity? With a deep breath, Laura prepared to reply, recognizing that the next step she took could define the trajectory of not just her podcast, but her evolving self. The journey was far from over, it was just beginning. The morning sun peeked through the curtains, casting soft light across Laura's cluttered desk, where half-finished planning sheets competed for space with her children's drawings. As she sat down, the weight of the previous day's decision pressed on her mind. Including Lisa in the initial conversation with Jillian was a fork in her path, one that promised growth but also uncertainty. She took a moment to reflect. The voice messages she replayed in her head swirled around, their tones distinct yet enmeshed into a single cacophony. Jillian's enthusiasm contrasted sharply with her own anxiety as her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She needed to craft a reply that acknowledged the complexity, not shying away from what it entailed. This was her opportunity to grapple with her fears, to carve out a space not just for herself but for other women who had navigated similar struggles. With clarity surging through her, Laura responded to Jillian. "I'd love to include Lisa. I believe her perspective will enrich our conversations. Let us find a time to discuss our approach." Each word was deliberate, reflecting her shifting mindset. She was no longer just the solo podcaster seeking validation, she was stepping into a role that demanded courage and collaboration. After sending the message, she felt a mixture of exhilaration and dread. There was no turning back now. If she was to make this a sincere dialogue about motherhood, every narrative mattered, and she needed to embrace the complexities rather than fear them. Days turned into a blur as she juggled responsibilities. Each postponement or hesitation from Jillian and Lisa gnawed at her confidence, yet every instance they met to discuss their shared stories illuminated budding connections. They each shared their truths, unveiling layers of vulnerability. Laura realized her initial fears were rooted in her perception of inadequacy. In truth, their experiences resonated far deeper than she had imagined. The trio forged ahead, planning their first recording session, and as discussions grew more robust, Laura felt herself transforming into an orchestrator of conversations rather than just a passive participant. Each narrative flowed through her like a thread weaving a tapestry of motherhood, rich with layers and textures that only became visible through shared experience. Yet, like an undercurrent, her anxieties often resurfaced. What if she faltered during the recordings? Was she truly equipped to handle the dynamics of multiple personalities, all vying to be heard with equal weight? Each time a new facet of their stories emerged, she felt herself retreating slightly, worried about maintaining balance among passionate voices. On what should have been a celebratory day, her podcast launch approaching, a core fear struck her with brutal intensity. Would her listeners absorb the messages they were striving to share? Or would they focus on her shortcomings as a host, the one who feared stepping too far into the emotional landscape of others? The evening before the launch, as her children laughed in the next room, Laura found herself in a spiral of self-doubt. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jillian, sending a reminder of their digital meeting scheduled for the next day. "Let us remember this is a space for all of us. You're doing an amazing job bringing our stories together." Laura let out a shaky breath. The words resonated deep within her, but the lingering question remained: could she truly lead this endeavor, fostering a space for such raw honesty without losing herself in the process? As she prepared her notes for the next day, another thought began to germinate in her mind. Perhaps she was more than just an organizer, perhaps she was destined to guide, to elevate voices not just from her own perspective, but from a collective synergy that could foster healing, and in that, she would find her strength. With resolve, she set her notes aside and took a moment to breathe deeply. This journey would demand more than she had anticipated. It would push her to confront her fears of inadequacy and galvanize her into action. As she drifted into sleep, the realization struck her greatest challenge yet awaited. Could she retain her authenticity while allowing others to innovate the narrative alongside her? The launch was imminent, and as she prepared to step onto the stage of her own creation, she hadn't just seen the complexities surrounding her, she had begun to embrace them, knowing that the true essence of their stories might transform her like no other experience could. But even as the dawn broke, she couldn't shake off the worry that perhaps the tighter she held onto the reins, the more she would miss the spontaneous beauty that could emerge among them all. Would she find the courage to let go and trust the process? Or would she dwindle under the looming expectations that now hung over the podcast and herself? As the first rays of the sun kissed her window, that pressing question remained, bringing with it an urgency that rolled over her like a threshold waiting to be crossed. Laura awoke to the sound of children's laughter filtering through the thin walls of her home, a soothing reminder of what was truly at stake. This was no longer just a podcast, it was a reflection of her life, her struggles, and the stories she believed were begging to be told. The voice message from Jillian still echoed in her mind, both a comfort and a challenge. How could she create this space for vulnerability without losing her own voice in the chorus? The launch was today, and with each passing moment, anxiety swelled within her. As she made her way to the kitchen, she caught sight of herself in the reflection of the window. The woman staring back was not the timid podcaster questioning her every move, but rather someone who had the potential to influence and inspire. Yet, doubt crept in. Was she really prepared to confront these narratives of motherhood, laden with emotion and complexity? She busied herself with breakfast, seeking solace in the simple routine of pouring cereal and cracking eggs. But the act of nourishment offered little distraction from the impending sense of responsibility. She grabbed her notes, ruffling through them as if the answers were hidden within the pages. The podcast wasn't about perfection, it was about authenticity, her greatest asset. But was she truly ready to wield it with strength? A message from Lisa popped up on her screen, nervous but ready. "Can't wait to share this journey with you both." A warmth spread through Laura, the kind that comes from shared anticipation. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone. They were in this together, three mothers knitting their experiences into a fabric of understanding and support. But would that bond be strong enough to withstand the scrutiny they might face? In the quiet moments before she and Jillian logged into their meeting with Lisa, Laura questioned her preparedness. Had she anticipated the various angles of the stories to be shared? Would she facilitate rather than dominate? There was a fine line between guiding the conversation and taking over, and she felt on the precipice. As they gathered virtually, Laura noticed Jillian's bright smile and the way Lisa's eyes shimmered with excitement. This was the spark she needed, a reminder that, despite her fears, they were united by the shared desire to explore motherhood in its myriad forms. They started discussing the format, covering ground rules that emphasized listening and respect, allowing each voice to resonate. Yet, just as the conversation took flight, her insecurities began to murmur. What if her questions were inadequate? What if the discussions became too emotional, and she floundered in managing those depths? She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Let us be honest with one another. We're opening doors to experiences that might be raw and messy, and that's okay, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Yes. This is what I love about our approach. We're real, and we're embracing the mess, Jillian added, her enthusiasm infectious. Lisa nodded vigorously, and at that moment, Laura's resolve solidified. She wouldn't allow her doubt to dictate the tone of their conversations. Instead, she would lean into the discomfort, creating a sacred space where vulnerabilities could flourish. As they moved into the logistical details, Laura's heart raced with anticipation. She realized this podcast meant more than sharing experiences. It was an act of courage, a commitment to face her vulnerabilities alongside Jillian and Lisa. They were forging a path, not just for themselves but for future listeners who might find strength in their stories. With the final touches set in place, Laura felt a shift within herself. She was beginning to shed the skin of self-doubt and don a new mantle of leadership. It was time to step into the role she had envisioned for herself, to guide with both compassion and confidence. Yet, as they ended the meeting with smiles and excited chatter, a fresh wave of anxiety crested over her. What if she stumbled in front of an audience she had yet to fully grasp? What if the once nourishing format turned chaotic in the hands of spirited mothers sharing their stories? The launch was not just an event, it was a public declaration of her journey. And in that fragility, Laura discovered a new truth. Perhaps the fear itself was a part of the process. How she navigated through it might very well become the essence of their collective story. Would she be able to rise to this challenge, to transform fear into a tool for growth? As she stood up to make her preparations, the question loomed larger than ever: could she embrace the story unfolding before her without losing her sense of self in the process? With every heartbeat, the answer awaited, filled with both trepidation and hope. Laura's heart raced as she prepared her workspace for the launch. The sleek microphone loomed before her like a sentinel awaiting her command. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, yet the anticipation of sharing her story ignited a fire within her. Each piece of equipment neatly arranged, each note strategically placed, were physical manifestations of her readiness. Yet, a storm brewed inside, full of questions. What if her voice cracked? What if the conversation derailed into uncomfortable territory? She paced the room, her thoughts spiraling around the potential pitfalls. But then, a realization struck her. This was more than just a podcast about motherhood, it was her chance to redefine herself, to step out of the shadow of doubt and into the light of authenticity. As the clock ticked closer to the launch, she sat down and closed her eyes, mentally rehearsing the introduction. The sound of children's laughter echoed softly through the walls, grounding her momentarily. That laughter was a reminder that vulnerability was not a weakness but a bridge connecting their experiences, allowing listeners to find solace in shared struggles and joys. When the moment finally arrived and she logged into the call, a blanket of warmth enveloped her as she saw Jillian and Lisa, their faces lit up with enthusiasm, mirroring her own inner turmoil. "Here we go," Laura whispered under her breath, hoping the words would shore up her faltering courage. "Okay, are we ready?" Jillian asked, determination in her voice. "Absolutely," Laura replied, surprising herself with the steadiness that accompanied her words. The trio exchanged affirming nods before hitting the record button. "Welcome everyone to Mothers in the Mess, where we're here to share the unfiltered realities of motherhood. I'm Laura," she opened, her voice shaking slightly but gaining strength with each word. As they fell into a rhythm, Laura became enthralled by the conversation, her initial fears retreating into the background. They began with their own stories: humorous mishaps in parenting, moments of overwhelming joy, the unending cycle of guilt and forgiveness. Laura found herself listening intently, her role as a guide was palpable. However, in the midst of their sharing, a nagging thought lingered in Laura's mind. Was she contributing enough? Her tendency to pull back, to allow others to shine, crept in, and she had to push against it. What about the times when we feel entirely out of control? She asked, challenging herself to lean in and provoke deeper reflection. Jillian and Lisa paused, visibly struck by the question's raw honesty. It was a turning point, a moment where vulnerability transformed into depth, and the conversation shifted toward their real fears. Laura found her voice swelling with conviction as they opened up about isolation and the societal pressure to always appear put together. By the end of the call, something incredible had shifted within Laura. As they wrapped up, she realized she had embraced her role not only as a facilitator but as an essential component of the discussion. Every share was guided by her questions, every moment curated by her willingness to dive headfirst into the murky waters of emotion. However, as she closed the recording, a new anxiety settled deep in her chest. Would this connection resonate beyond their small group? What if they became targets of criticism, their raw truths dissected by the very people they hoped to reach? It struck her that the battle hadn't ended, it had merely shifted. With post-launch exhilaration still rushing through her veins, Laura contemplated her next steps. This was just the beginning, and a sense of urgency aroused. She had broached topics that peeled back layers of her own insecurities, but how would those revelations land in the wider world? The journey ahead was uncertain, and she knew she had to be ready for what might come next. As she prepared to walk away from her makeshift studio, a new question emerged, bold and unyielding: how could she transform the fear of judgment into a driving force for growth and connection in the conversations yet to come? The answer awaited her, shrouded in darkness but illuminated by the flicker of authenticity they had begun to forge together. The dawn of a new era broke in Laura's life as she stood before the glowing screen of her laptop. The podcast launch had been a resounding success, a whirlwind of emotions swirling around her as she absorbed each accolade. But as the applause faded and the initial exhilaration settled, a fresh wave of introspection made its way to the forefront of her mind. What awaited her now? With every passing moment, Laura's realization deepened: this journey was about more than just sharing her story, it was about igniting a collective fire of resilience and connection among mothers navigating the same tumultuous seas. Each episode they recorded became a beacon of hope, yet she knew they must delve deeper, address the raw and messy facets of motherhood even more unapologetically. In this pivotal moment, Laura embraced her power, understanding that vulnerability wasn't simply a challenge to overcome, rather, it was an opportunity to forge stronger connections. She turned the clock back a few days in her mind, recalling moments of discomfort when speaking openly triggered substantial shifts in perspective. Taking her reflections seriously, Laura began drafting ideas for new episodes, eager to build even more momentum. She envisioned roundtable discussions that invited not just stories but solutions, practical advice exchanged within the warmth of shared experiences. But more importantly, she needed to fortify her own approach, embracing an assurance she had yet to fully recognize. Just then, her phone pinged with a message from Jillian, the mother who had been the first to embrace her podcast journey. "I've been thinking we should tackle the topic of raising kids in a digital age. What do you think?" Without a second thought, Laura positively responded, her excitement palpable. This was what she had envisioned, weaving powerful threads of different experiences into a singular narrative filled with authenticity. "Let us do it." She typed back quickly, her heart racing with the promise of exploration. As they dove into research, the conversations flowed easily yet meaningfully. Sharing resources, discussing experts to bring on as guests, and breaking down the fears surrounding the digital dangers children now faced forged a bond deeper than surface-level interaction. For the first time, Laura felt a surge of confidence. She was no longer just the participant in this conversation but the catalyst for change. Days turned into nights as Laura, Jillian, and Lisa collaborated diligently, pouring their hearts into crafting episodes that resonated with their growing audience. Each session felt electric. They connected over the same struggles, united by one common thread: the desire to make motherhood better for their children and themselves. However, with greatness came responsibility. The shadow of self-doubt still lingered, whispering in the back of her mind. What if the topics they chose were too touchy? Would they alienate listeners rather than attract them? But with so much fire in her belly from their discussions, she dismissed the negativity as noise. Soon the day arrived when their new episodes would be released. The trio had planned a launch event, inviting mothers from their community to join them for a live discussion. As the moment approached, Laura felt the familiar flutter of nerves return but also a newfound strength. This was her opportunity to showcase not only their voices but also their evolution as individuals. Standing in front of an audience brought its own challenges, yet this time, she was ready. She opened the event with gratitude for the community that uplifted them, acknowledging the profound impact of sharing their experiences. "We all strive to normalize the struggles so often swept under the rug," she emphasized, her voice steady. The conversation flowed seamlessly, and Laura found herself guiding it with a skillful hand. Questions that arose felt natural, provoking dialogue that flowed openly between her, Jillian, and Lisa. The freedom of expression created a palpable energy that uplifted the room, embracing both. Laughter and tears as they weaved through the landscapes of motherhood. Afterward, listeners approached them with stories of their own, women thanking them for creating this platform. In those moments, her heart swelled with deep satisfaction. She had transformed from a hesitant individual sharing her own struggles into a recognized voice for change. As the event concluded, Laura felt a truly exhilarating sense of accomplishment wash over her. It wasn't just about the podcast growing in popularity, it was about positioning herself as a confident leader, someone facilitating real connections and healing amongst mothers around her. Finally embracing her worth, she had conquered the internal doubts that had once chained her down. Laura stood tall, the realization settling in she was now a respected figure in a space she had once feared to enter. This transformation brought her joy, alongside a sense of purpose that thrived in empowering others. Laura looked forward to the road ahead, optimistic about continuing this endeavor and committed to further exploring the depths of connection among mothers. She knew her journey would continue to evolve, but for now, she stood confidently within herself, a single mom, mentor, and champion. If you resonate with this transformative journey, connect with us. You need to subscribe now for more inspiring stories. Show your support, leave a like now to elevate parent narratives. Comment below about your thoughts or theories about Laura's story. And don't wait even one more second, share this video with at least 5 friends who could benefit from the power of shared experiences. You never know who will need that reminder of resilience.